They thought radio was evil. Oh my God, don't go on radio. You go into the film industry. My dad could not go see a movie in a movie theater.
I couldn't either.
Yeah, exactly. You'd go to hell, brother.
Yeah, you're going to hell.
And, but, you know, what's sad is if Christians aren't going to use these tools, the devil will use them.
Oh, yeah.
They will use technology, movies, films, radio, television, the internet to affect your kids, my kids, into the ways of the world or things that we don't necessarily agree with as Christians. So I said, and my father was a pioneer in this. We are going to use every technology possible, the internet, film, movies, TV, radio, shortwave, whatever we can do to preach the gospel. That's what we're going to do.
Wow. So you still pretty much doing that, right?
I am. Yeah. I had several stints at TBN. I was there in the early years from 73 to 83. Those were the pioneering era. But in the 80s, 90s, and 90s, I had my own production company. Now, Brandon, who is, you know, you'll talk to later, my son, was just a little kid. But I traveled with Billy Graham. I traveled with Bill Bright. I used to direct a show called Hour of Power with Robert Schuller.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the era. Now, I worked with TBN. I just didn't work for TBN. And then in 2000, I went back full time. And I was there. My father was getting older. They were struggling with getting into this new technology called the internet.
Right.
You know, my dad, his era was broadcasting and satellite. You know, broadcasting meaning his era was transmitting a TV signal from a mountain and you get rabbit ears on your TV set. Again, many of your viewers don't even know what that is. VHF, UHF, and you used to get TV wirelessly. Believe it or not. So my dad understood broadcasting, he understood satellite, he did not understand the internet. As that started to emerge, I brought TBN into a new era of video on demand, internet streaming, and what finally got my father connected with the internet, and this was a great story. He and I had traveled in 2003 or 4 to China. China had invited my father, and they wanted to get Christian television into China. And they were fascinated with this Jesus person. Who is he? Now, a lot of people in the Chinese government thought Jesus was a fairy tale, you know, like King Arthur. They had no clue that this was a history book. But when Dad started explaining that Christ was real, he was pro-government, pay unto Caesar, that is Caesar's. You know, the Chinese were absolutely clueless when it came to Christianity. Absolutely. They are raised really agnostic. So they were fascinated with TBN and they invited us over. We met with the vice premier, which would be like meeting our vice president here in America. We had dinner at the Hall of the People, which would have been like the White House. So we were being wined and dined all over the country. But I took my dad into a little, what they called in those days, internet cafes. And all of a sudden, I went into an internet cafe and you could send emails back and forth. I went in, we rented a computer, I went to TBN's website, and it took, 3 minutes to download to finally get the whole thing. But I said, look, Dad, here's TBN in communist China. I clicked on our streaming. At that time, it was a thing called Real Media. I don't know if you remember Real Media. It was really one of the first video players before QuickTime, before...
Oh, yeah.
You remember them?
I do remember, yeah.
They were like...
They were before Windows, actually.
Exactly right.
Around the same time, almost.
Exactly right. You know, they were... Sometimes the first one in isn't the winner, And they were one of the first ones doing video on the internet. Clicked on TBN, and within about a minute, a box about that big, and it was probably 16 pixels by 16 pixels. It was like watching a postage stamp. But we were watching TBN in communist China. And they couldn't keep it out. They weren't blocking it or anything. And I said, Dad, this is the future. And I said, the internet is going to get into parts of the world like North Korea, like Iran, Iraq, I said, they'll get into parts of the world where you would be killed or murdered if we tried to share the gospel in person. And he finally, I saw it in his face. He sat down and he said, Paul, you're right. And so that's when we really, in the 2000s, started investing money into the internet, building servers, building video on demand. And that was kind of my contribution to TBN in the early days. So
you guys were actually pioneers, because you go from your dad doing the Holy Beamer with the 18-wheeler, which is what ABC, NBC, CBS use to film games and go live at a location. Your dad was the one that came up with the concept of an 18-wheeler.
That's correct.
Basically being its own control room. And then you come right along before Netflix and start the whole on-demand thing, before it was even a Netflix.
That's correct. No, we were true pioneers in those two areas. And satellite, the concept of being able to have one signal hit a satellite that orbited the Earth, cover the whole United States with one signal, was literally mind-blowing. And let me read this scripture for you real quick, because I think you'll find it fascinating. So, like I said, my father was a true pioneer, not only in broadcasting, which was building TV stations, meaning you built one in LA, then you went to Phoenix, then you went to Oklahoma City, then went to Dallas. You built a city at a time.
What they call broadcast today.
Right.
Call it broadcast.
It's almost like franchising, but you had to have a transmitter, you had to have a tower or a mountain, you had to have a studio in every city, and that would reach just that city.
Right.
So satellite was reaching all 350 or 80 million people in one swoop back in the day. So there is a satellite, and that, what's interesting, orbits in what we call geosynchronous orbit, which is 26,000 miles up in, it's not in space, and I'll tell you why that's important, and it's not in our atmosphere. It's in what we call mid-space. And it orbits, a signal would hit that and rain down all over the United States. Now take a look at that. If you were John the Revelator and you'd never seen a satellite before, you see that in a vision. RCA named this bird Angel 1. We didn't name it that. They named it Angel 1. Okay, so keep that in the back of your brain for a second. Let me take you to Revelation. And my dad quoted this many, many times. Revelation 14:6. And this is from John the Revelator. Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven. Not in the atmosphere, not in space. This angel was flying in the mid-heavens. In fact, the King James says mid-heavens, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, fear God, give him glory, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him who made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water. And for 14 years that angel orbited, preaching the gospel, fear God, give him glory. And what was interesting about that satellite, Trinity Broadcasting, obviously Trinity means three, TBN was the third customer on that satellite.
Wow.
HBO, Cinemax, TBN.
Wow.
So that was his era. That was his, really, and God had given him a vision of satellite.
Right.
So he knew he was going in the right direction because God really directed him as a pioneer in satellite. Okay, we're sitting here, 40 years later, satellite's still around, it's a dying technology.
Right.
25 years ago, if I would have said to you, what is a cloud? Well, a cloud is a white, puffy thing in the sky.
Right.
Clouds were rain cams. And what is the cloud today? The sum total of every piece of data that you're creating, that every network is creating, every phone call, every time I surf the web, every time I go to my computer, every time I watch TV, that's going through the cloud, which is in essence like the internet. Okay, let's go down to Revelation 14:14. just a few scriptures down. We see satellite in 14:6. Look at 14:14. And think of this with the cloud now being the internet. Then I looked, and behold a white cloud, and on the cloud sat one like the Son of Man. Not a cloud, he sat on the cloud.
Right.
Having his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, thrust in your sickle and reap, for the time has come for you to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. So he who sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. And I am absolutely convinced that, again, a lot of scripture has double meaning, double entendre. John, did he see an angel or did he see that satellite? Now, if you don't believe in God, I mean, you're sitting there going, these guys are Looney Tunes.
Right.
You know, but if you really have a faith background, I really believe that the cloud is how we are going to use this technology that you're pioneering, we're all pioneering, to reach the last generation. It's up to us as Christians to use these tools to create good material, good content, good shows that will go into the cloud. People will watch it. Listen, the world is carrying a TV set on their hip right now. Even in third world countries. You know, there's more cell phones in Africa than America. And if we will create good content, people will watch. You know that. You're creating your own lane. And I believe we are going to use this to reach people for the gospel. And this will be the final harvest, in my opinion.